without the military effort, the huge sacrifice of our soldiers, because they're the ones who created the conditions on the ground that actually enabled our leaders, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to facilitate this deal, to make it feasible, and bring a proposal that was never on the table at any other point in time throughout this war.
We have just experienced one of the greatest answers to prayer that I have ever seen in my lifetime. It was almost impossible for anyone, even Christians. We believe in the power of prayer. Jewish people who do believe in the power of prayer, and not everybody does, but it was very difficult for 2 years to think that we could really get all of the living hostages out of those hellholes that Hamas has created, those dungeons that I've been in, that actually my guest has been in. We are rejoicing. The emotions, it's off the charts. And we're also asking a lot of questions. Now what? Where are we going? Where is Israel going from here? Where are the Palestinians going from here? Where's the broader epicenter, the broader Middle East going as the President of the United States brings Air Force One into Israel and its neighbors? You know, the Joshua Fund is very much about Israel and her neighbors. And what an astonishing day Monday was, Monday, October 13th. And we're still processing it. And I want to welcome you to Inside the Epicenter. This is the flagship educational project of the Joshua Fund, a ministry to educate and mobilize Christians in the United States, Canada, and around the world to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, according to the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, 1-3, in which one of those verses is God says of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Jacob that become Israel, those who bless you, I will bless. But those who curse you, I will curse. And I think we are seeing that truth from the first book of the Bible play itself out in real time in our lives. Well, again, welcome to Inside the Epicenter. This is Joel Rosenberg. I'm the founder and president of the ministry. And I want to welcome a very dear friend of mine and my wife, Lynn, and this organization and All Israel News, because she worked for us. Then she got hired by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on October 6th. Well, technically it was October 7th in Israel, but it was Friday night, October 6th in New York, where she was living. And the call from the Prime Minister's office was, we're at war. We're drafting you to be a spokesman for the Prime Minister. Get on a plane Saturday evening after Shabbat ends, and you're going to start on Sunday. Tal Heinrich was my producer for the Rosenberg Report in our early years. She was a senior correspondent for All Israel News, and then she left me, but for good reasons, to go work for the Prime Minister of Israel in the most dangerous and existential moment that Israel had ever faced in our history. Tal Heinrich, welcome, my friend. There's a lot to go through, but I just want to say first, it's good to see you. And in the midst of all this, you got married. You've had a baby, you're a mom, you're living a very different life. You're not working for the Prime Minister anymore. You're doing some work for All Israel News as you're able, but I'm so glad to see you and glad to reconnect with you. And I'm just so grateful you as a friend and as a champion of a country that you were born and raised in, Israel.
I got hired by my son. Joel, it's so great to be with you. It's really great to see you. It's such a meaningful week. It's unimaginable, really, where we're at right now. It feels like a national resurrection, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, because they were literally coming up out of graves. I mean, this feels like Ezekiel 37. I hadn't actually applied that thought yet, but for you as a Jewish person who, you don't believe in Jesus, we love you anyway. That's unconditional love that evangelicals have. But you just referred to a very Old Testament Jewish scriptures, which is God. Yeah, people can seem dead, and then he can bring them back. And it does feel like a national resurrection, as well as for those 20 specific Israelis who lived trapped in chains and basically being starved to death for 738 horrifying days.
It's a deeply moving personal moment for them, of course, and their families and their communities. But overall, across the country, it's the first time in the past 2 years in which we can feel overwhelmingly public joy, unrestrained joy.
Right.
And it's so different. It feels good. At the same time, for a moment, we don't forget about the huge sacrifice of these
Yes.
families, the victims of October 7th, the sacrifice, the effort of our soldiers, the wounded ones in soul, in body as well. Without them, we wouldn't be here. Without the military effort, the huge sacrifice of our soldiers, because they're the ones who created the conditions on the ground that actually enabled our leaders, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to facilitate this deal, to make it feasible, and bring a proposal that was never on the table at any other point in time throughout this war, a proposal that we could accept and the other side under the current circumstances could accept. But we have to see it through. We have to see it through.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Just we'll front load this, and then we'll back up and kind of get ourselves back up to this moment. I want to get your take on when you first heard, when you watched the Trump Netanyahu press conference at the White House when the 20-point plan was being unveiled several weeks ago, and then Trump announcing on social media last week the deal is done and the hostages are really coming out, and sort of your emotions, and then sort of your perspective on Monday the 13th as it played out. But I want to start with, as we record this on Wednesday, October 15th, the news this morning is that President Trump is warning Hamas, you better give back all 28 Israeli hostages that died in your captivity. You promised to release them at the same time as the living hostages. You only released a few. And if you do not release all of them, we'll go back to war with you. That was a very strong statement, and because I think Hamas is already testing the president of the United States and seeing how serious is he.
It's true. And he said another very powerful statement just yesterday. He said that if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. That's exactly what every Israeli wanted to hear. He's saying exactly what the president of the United States, who brought us this deal, should be saying. That's how you speak to these terrorists. That's how you speak to these enemies. And that's why they came to the table and agreed to this deal. Now, you and I, we know that every person in Israel, of course, we wanted to see all hostages coming back. We want the bodies of the deceased hostages being brought to proper burial in Israel. But we have two additional goals for this war that the war cabinet had agreed upon since day one. We said that we want to see the downfall of Hamas as a military of Gaza, as the government of Gaza. And we said that we want to see a Gaza that will never pose a threat to Israel ever again. Now, the Trump plan is exactly about that, because you have 20 different points there, with point one being about the de-radicalization of Gaza, which is incredible.
And demilitarization, right, exactly, yes.
And demilitarization and de-radicalization of the Gaza Strip. So of the Palestinian society, rather. So we want, yes, there's a ceasefire in place right now, and we're cautiously very, very optimistic, and we're very happy that the hostages came back home, but there was a ceasefire in place on October 6th. That's not the kind of ceasefire that we hope we have in place now. Something has to be different about it. And I think that we've seen the commitment of the Trump administration, the dedication they had to the plight of our hostages. And we expect to see the same commitment and same dedication to the rest of the deal, to the other clauses that appear there.
Absolutely. And I think what you're laying out for our viewers and listeners on Inside the Epicenter is, yes, there are many actually points that still have to be worked out and have to be enforced. As a parent, now you're a young parent, you're still of an infant, but as Lynn and I raised 4 little babies up until, full adulthood, marriage, the Israeli military, and so forth. One of the lines that Lynn heard from somebody and we applied to our life as parents was, it's not what you expect, it's what you inspect. In other words, if you tell your kids this is the standard, but you never check and make sure they're really keeping that standard and then enforce those standards lovingly but firmly, then they're going to hear it as hypocrisy or as just irrelevant. Mom and dad are just blah, blah, blah. They're just talking. They don't mean it. So it's not just what you expect. The 20-point plan, that's the expectation. But the inspection, like literally, President Trump, shockingly, and I haven't even seen this being controversial in the MAGA movement, but sent 200 U.S. troops onto the ground in Israel to begin the process of beginning to build an infrastructure for what they're calling the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, that will be the military police force to disarm Hamas and make sure every tunnel is cleared out of they literally a week ago, the IDF found long-range missiles poised, ready to shoot into central Israel. The hours before Trump announced on social media the deal had been done, about 5 Hamas terrorists popped up out of a tunnel and ambushed an Israeli unit and tried to kidnap another Israeli. This was just out. So there's a lot ahead of us. And I want to be real clear. I'm very optimistic, and I'm not, I'm a Russian Jew, so I should, I'm a pessimist by nature. The glass is half empty, it's cracked, and it's leaking. That's the way I see the world because of my heritage, but I'm actually bullish on this process. But I don't want to mislead people. I want to say there are going to be problems, there are going to be hardships, there are going to be bad days ahead. This is war, and we're trying to ratchet down this war, but we're dealing with suicidal, pathological, genocidal people. So when I say I'm optimistic about the trajectory, it doesn't mean I don't expect problems. And I think you, our listeners, viewers, should expect problems. That's why we will keep praying. And Tal, I think your point here up front is important. But it also, at the same time.
I just want to pick it up from what you just said of being optimistic. I think one of the reasons why we allow ourselves to be optimistic about what we have in place right now is because I have trust in the Trump administration. I have trust in the current Israeli leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu for a few reasons. First, they have great cooperation between them.
Astonishing, right? Because we just heard a couple of days ago, there was a reporter saying that Trump was using the F-bomb. Bibi doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. And we're like, that's not what's really happening. And we know that's not happening. And you can see it in those speeches and on that the affection and the cooperation and the respect for each other. Even with Trump saying, Bibi, sometimes you're a hard guy to work with, but I love you. Yeah.
But another thing, and I think we already brought it up on this podcast, on the Epicenter last time we spoke, is this notion that both of them, they don't confuse diplomacy with achievement. They set out a goal.
Right.
They define exactly what it would mean to achieve this goal once it's fulfilled. And they use diplomacy as a tool, one of various tools, including military tools, for example, and Trump's transactional style of, leveraging, using leverages and negotiations and so forth to achieve their goal. So they don't confuse the two, whereas other administrations, other lawmakers, other global leaders from European leaders and so forth, they do confuse diplomacy with achievement. They think that engaging in diplomacy by itself is some sort of an achievement. It's not.
Yes,
so
right.
That's one of the reasons why I do have strong faith that these two people right now, there's a reason why they're in their roles, and they will see it through. They will do their best to see it through. And if, there are certain hurdles, they have tools to deal with them, and they have plans. So that's why I allow myself to be optimistic, not because Hamas somehow changed their colors, not because I trust Turkey and I trust Qatar. They are Hamas's best friends.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Look, there are evangelicals and maybe, some, maybe many who listen and watch to this podcast. And I want to say, look, you do not have to be a big fan of President Trump. You don't have to be a big fan of Prime Minister Netanyahu. What we're saying in this, and yes, obviously I worked for Bibi, 25 years ago. That was for a few months and it was a long time ago. Been an independent person for a long time. Tal, yes, she got hired by her country at a time of war to be the spokeswoman, one of them, for the prime minister. And so she knows him. She's worked with him through this war. She does have an affection and a trust and a confidence in the prime minister, but she's not working for him now, and she's an independent actor. So I really want to say that I think that we are both looking objectively at Trump and Netanyahu, but differently from other journalists who almost have not almost, they have a knee-jerk view that these two are always wrong, corrupt, and it's always, and they can't do anything right. Now, we don't think that. We see their flaws, but we also see their strengths. And what Tal, you just said was, because we heard a speech that we thought, oh, that would be a great vision. We're seeing Trump bomb the Iranian nuclear reactor. Years ago, he ripped up the Iran nuclear deal that Obama thought, well, that's the diplomacy. That's enough. We solved it. He didn't solve it. He made it worse.
Right.
Trump could see it. But he didn't just criticize the deal. He bombed with American B-2 bombers and bunker busters. He literally did it. He
mentioned the connection between bombing Iran and the deal that we have in place. He said it wouldn't
What was the connection? Yeah, walk people through that. That's important.
He said that what we have, the circumstances that we just created, the Middle East that we have right now in front of us is a different Middle East. And unless we had this right now, we wouldn't have been able to bring all hostages back home. We wouldn't have had such a deal. He wouldn't be able to, talk to all other players who are part of this deal, the other Arab state, Muslim states that are also committed to this plan.
Absolutely. Trump has the high cards right now because he has offered diplomacy to the worst enemies in the world. Iran, he gave them, first of all, years, but then he gave them 60 days. Listen, you want to make a deal with me? Make a deal. It can be great for Iran. It can be great. You can be a fabulous situation. You just have to make a deal, right? He gave him 60 days. What Iran didn't realize, what I didn't realize, being totally candid, I didn't know that 60 meant 60, because on day 61, it's clear now, President Trump called Prime Minister Netanyahu and says, baby, go do what you got to do. I'm with you. He gave Iran 60 days. I was nervous when President Trump gave Iran 60 days, because I thought, they may try to bamboozle him. What'll happen? Is Trump backing away? Is he nervous? Is he not willing to use military force? Look, none of us want to use force, but sometimes there is no other way. But when Trump did it, when he first backed Netanyahu launching what became the 12-day war, that was huge. But also when Trump decided to finish the job by sending planes that Israel doesn't have, bombs that we can't fit on our planes because they're too huge. The bunker busters, 36,000 pounds. And he finished off the three worst, most hardened Iranian nuclear facilities. He didn't just neutralize the Iran nuclear threat for a generation. He sent a message to everybody in the region, as well as Moscow and Beijing. Don't mess with me. Like when I tell you something, I mean it. And that has, I think, impacted Trump's support for Bibi to use the military to go into Gaza City and say, we're going to finish. Already Israel has destroyed 23 of 25 Hamas battalions. The final, and they're not even full battalions, they're sort of, remnants, but they were in Gaza City, and Trump gave full green light, go get them. But Trump simultaneously used that to leverage Qatar and Turkey, who are not helpful actors generally, to say, go tell your friends, this is it. If they want to live, time is up. And you saw what I did with Iran, so don't mess with me, because Bibi will take you down. And using that combination of Israeli military force and American diplomacy with credibility, I think that's what created the breakthrough. I believe with tens of millions of people praying and God's mercy. But that's pretty dramatic cooperation between the United States and Israel.
It is. And also, I think what really made the difference is that finally someone was able to put pressure on Hamas's best friends, Qatar and Turkey. I think it's a bit of an overlooked aspect because we don't know much of what went down there. We don't know much. And we're journalists, but I don't trust the reporting that we see because you never know what really goes on in these conversations. And what kind of leverages? We do know some details, what kind of arms, what kind of, warplanes Turkey wants to purchase, what the Trump administration is demanding from Qatar, but it's not the whole story. And we might not know the entire story of how things really went down between Qatar and Turkey and the Trump administration. But finally,
That's your mission, Tal. That's your mission for All Israel News. I want you to go. No, but the two of us and our team, we're going to go figure it out. And
someone definitely should, but they didn't feel this pressure throughout this war. Right. And they are the ones who, I mean, they have connections for Hamas, with Hamas, with these terror groups, not only Hamas, as you know, Qatar has all other ties, and Turkey, even with ISIS, in Syria.
These leaders are living in their countries, and they're hosted and protected by their countries.
And we've been saying all along since the beginning of the war, well, if you have these connections and you say that you also have great ties to the Western world, and that these connections that you have with terror elements can actually benefit the Western world, so the burden of proof is on you. So finally, I think President Trump and his administration, if it's, I don't know, Jared Kushner and Witkoff, were able to pressure them and say, well, that's your time. That's your time to prove it right now.
Let me add something. Yeah, let me add something there, Tal, because we got an insight on this program and on All Israel News that most people haven't gotten yet. I had some friends just in the last couple of days asking me, well, what is Trump's relationship? Because he speaks so glowingly of Qatar and Turkey. Maybe he doesn't get it. And I said to this one particular person, no, last Thursday, I did an on-the-record phone interview with Israeli ambassador to the United States, Yechiel Leiter. He was in his car on his way to the airport in Washington, to Washington Dulles Airport, to take a flight to Newark and then on to Israel and get home before Shabbat started. He's a religious Orthodox Jew. And of course, to be in place for the President of the United States to arrive. And he told me early in the interview, and we ran it on All Israel News, but we also put it on the podcast. And it's very interesting because he said the thing that changed everything was that Trump threatened Qatar and Turkey. And he didn't go into the exact details, but this is the first person that I've heard in the room who was there with the prime minister at his side when the 20-point plan was being finalized, and when Netanyahu was being asked, encouraged strongly by President Trump, call the leader of Qatar. You don't have to apologize, but at least, make amends for the Qatari citizen who was tragically killed in the strike. But what Ambassador Leiter says is Trump threatened, obviously behind the scenes, Qatar and Turkey, and said, this is it. I will speak. All right, now I'm paraphrasing, so I want people to go back and listen to what Leiter said. But my interpretation is that was the highest ranking person I've heard use that terminology to describe what, even though Trump was using, kind and warm language openly, behind the scenes, he was turning the screws on two so-called American allies.
Right. It sort of reminds me of what he did with Pakistan back in his first term in 2018. Yes, the U.S. had great relations with Pakistan, even aid and whatnot. But if you remember, he stopped certain funding, certain budgets, and Ambassador Nikki Haley back then said, well, you can't be our friend and harbor terrorists. You have to choose. Right. So we may never know all the details, but I do get the sense, and I think many Israelis, just like me, after listening to his phenomenal speech at the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, that Trump is a president who truly gets it. Your book is all about enemies and allies. He knows who's an enemy, who's an ally, who's a frenemy.
Right.
And
he works on leveraging the frenemies back into our camp differently than I would, but he's successful, and I'm not even in that position. So I'm learning to trust him more than I might have. Look,
and I have a question to you, Joel. When was the last time you actually saw, it's another overlooked aspect of his visit, you saw a global leader visiting Israel and Egypt, delivering speeches, historic speeches, without mentioning the two-state solution or settlements? And
right. Yeah.
It's just a whole different game that we're at right now.
I agree. And I'll say on that one that a lot has been made of Netanyahu not getting invited by President Sisi. I'm glad that President Trump picked up the phone while they were driving in the limousine, the Beast, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and got Sisi on the phone. So, look, you guys haven't talked in 2 years. It's time to talk, and it's time to invite Netanyahu to the summit. I also am actually glad that Netanyahu didn't go because it was too fast and the ground wasn't set. Like, what's Netanyahu going to say to President Erdogan? Like, there's no groundwork laid there. What about President Abbas? They're going to shake hands. Has Abbas been helpful at all in this process? Like, so I think Trump's instinct to get Sisi and Netanyahu connected again was good. I think Netanyahu's instinct, this is premature. Let's watch this thing work and then lay down actual markers and goals and objectives. So I thought that was right. Look, we only have a few minutes left.
Great mind think alike. I told my husband a few days ago exactly what you just said. It's too early. It's not as if it's like the signing of the Abraham Accords that you can just go. It's premature.
Yeah. So why don't we only have a few minutes left, but some of your just instincts, your emotions, the off the top of your head thoughts when you heard that Trump last, on a week ago Wednesday announced on social media the deal is done. Witkoff and Kushner have done the deal, and then when you actually what you were thinking, what were some of your top line takeaways from that historic Monday, October 13th, where Trump arrives and I think gave one of his best speeches ever, because it wasn't just speculative of what a politician wants. He was there to say, we did it. There's more to do. And here's where I want to go. But we did something that everybody said was impossible. I thought it was one of Netanyahu's finest moments too. But I'm just curious, it's just some of your takeaways from all of this.
So first, I allowed myself, like most Israelis, to feel joy. And I was happy in that moment. I'm still happy in that moment. But at the same time, I was wondering, and still am, will Israel go back to fighting if we're not able to see this deal through and all 20 points being carried out? And I know this. I know there are soldiers, our military, our leadership. I trust the Trump administration to do what's right if it comes down to this. I am worried about pressure, domestic pressure in Israel, in the US, and international pressure, of course. But what both Trump and Bibi have shown me, I think, over the past, since Trump is in office and throughout the war with Netanyahu, is that they do not succumb to pressure. And this is why I have so much faith. You and I, we consume some Israeli media. You know what's been talked about in Israel. You see protests. You see what's being talked about in Europe and also here in the US. These two, they're made out of a whole different material.
Political Teflon.
Yeah, they are resilient to pressure.
I would say titanium. Teflon implies nothing sticks to them in terms of attacks. That's not true. But titanium, they have spines of steel. And I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. I'm not saying they don't have moments of judgment lapse, but they are strong. And even Trump said to Bibi from the rostrum in the Knesset, "You're a tough guy, Bibi, but that's why we love you." He was having fun with Bibi's a tough person to work with because he is fiercely committed to what he wants to do. And sometimes he does not play well in the sandbox, even with his friends, much less, his allies. But he also gets stuff done. He knows how to win. Trump loves winners. And he sees in Bibi a guy, not just politically, I'm not talking about that. I mean, winning this war. And Trump needed to show him, you have won this war. Let me go win the peace with you. But
Trump told Israelis just on Monday, Israel's security will no longer be threatened in any way, shape, or form. That's what we wanted to hear. That's what we want to see now. I trust them both to continue to do what is right, not what's trendy, not what's been chanted, in the streets, whether if it's Tel Aviv or New York or Washington, wherever across Europe, not what's simple, not what everyone else thinks could work, but have proven to fail time and again. So I do have trust in them that we'll see it through. Is it going to be easy? It's not going to be easy, not for them, not politically. But I think, just like you, I really hope that good times are ahead. Also, when I see some of these, there are some horrific images out of Gaza of mass public executions of Hamas,
horrible.
Shooting Palestinians who resist the rule in the streets right now. But to finish on a more positive note, it shows you that there are people there who don't want Hamas, who want to choose differently this time, that they see this moment as an opportunity. And you know how we say in Hebrew that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, but maybe this time around it's different because you have the commitment from Israel, you have the commitment from the United States, and you have the commitment from various Arab states that we're going to give you the tools so that you will be able to choose differently this time, and that we'll all head into better times. So I hope.
It shows what you just said. I totally agree with you. And we have a lot more as evangelicals to be praying about. This is not over, but it's a huge, huge breakthrough. We should rejoice. We should thank the God of Israel, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That's not the way Trump normally talks, but he opened the speech. I'll close on this part, my interview with you. He literally opened the speech by thanking the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what a beautiful, and he had a lot of wonderful biblical language in his speech. And it was also a speech that was very magnanimous. Yes, it's Trump's triumph, humanly speaking, with Bibi, but he's praised Bibi a lot, tweaked him a little bit, poked him a little bit, talked about how nice the opposition leader was, and can't we all get along? Come on, you can, that type of thing. But also he dished out a lot of praise for his team, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Marco Rubio, whom he predicted will be the greatest Secretary of State in history. He called out Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer and others it was not characteristic of him. He was magnanimous in victory, as Winston Churchill once talked about. Steely resolve, but magnanimous, and a kinder, gentler side of Trump. Trump has just achieved something that he promised he would achieve, but I don't think almost anybody on the planet thought he could do it. Tal Heinrich, thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you that you're prioritizing your marriage and your baby and motherhood. And as much as we're not getting as much as we would love from you, we would never want it the other way. We love your focus, and I'm just grateful for you, and I'm grateful for your perspective. Let's do more of this as you have time.
We should, definitely. This was a pleasure as always, Joel. Great to see you.
Bless you. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Well, I love Tal Heinrich. I'm so glad that she was my producer for the Rosenberg Report. Love all the work she's done over the years with All Israel News. And I was glad that she has the skill set and the experience that attracted the attention of the Prime Minister of Israel, and was more than happy, as hard as it was, to let her go and serve her country and her government that way. And it's great to get her perspective. There's a little bit more I want to cover. I want to tell you some of my takeaways from Monday, from Monday, October 13th, the arrival of President Trump in Israel, the speech that he gave, the speech that Prime Minister Netanyahu gave. I think there's a few more things that are important as we process this extraordinary moment. Then, of course, President Trump went to Egypt. It wasn't just Israel, it was the neighbors. What are some of the takeaways from there? So I want to share a few really important things that you're not hearing in the mainstream media. They'll give you the headlines, they'll give you a few key quotes, but there was so much going on in Israel and Egypt. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. I'm Joel Rosenberg, one of the founders and president of the Joshua Fund. And I want to share a little bit more on some of my takeaways from October 13th, the huge, this really was one of the biggest days, certainly the most encouraging, exciting moments in modern Middle Eastern history. Certainly, I would say since the signing of the Abraham Accords, which I was God graciously gave me the opportunity to be invited to the White House in September of 2020 and to be on the White House lawn as President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and leaders from Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates actually signed the documents, and had the joy of being invited by then Vice President Mike Pence to come up to his office and do an interview with him and talk to him about what had just happened. And, Pence was in the room as all these things happened. And so to me, that was the most encouraging moment in modern Middle Eastern history, certainly in the 21st century, right? There were big moments when the Camp David Accords and the signing of the first Arab-Israeli peace treaty between Israel and Egypt back in 1979. And of course, in 1994, when Israel made peace with the Kingdom of Jordan. Those were two huge and encouraging moments. But we haven't had a lot of encouraging moments in the last half century, last 30 years or so, let's say. And the Abraham Accords was the pinnacle of that until now. And in some ways, I think, certainly emotionally for Israel, the release of all 20 live hostages after 738 days and having the President of the United States come to Israel on the same day that the hostages were being released was such an emotional explosion of joy, of relief, of excitement, of just people breaking down, weeping, seeing families reunited, the rapturous reunions of these hostages and their families. I mean, wow, the images of, and we've got this on the Rosenberg Report in terms of television to show you the just people bear hugging each other, these families who've not seen each other and weren't sure if they would ever see each other. I mean, this is just, it's been a huge moment of catharsis in Israel. And it doesn't mean there aren't hard days ahead. It doesn't mean we've got a long slog to turn all this into actual long-term peace and security. Obvious. And there's a huge, long journey of recovery for these hostages, for their families, for the soldiers, for the wounded, for the families that lost soldiers in this war, for the Palestinians, and for both Israeli and Palestinian societies, as well as everybody else in the region, the Lebanese and others who've been affected so deeply by this war. There's going to be medical attention needed. There's going to be counseling that's needed. Ultimately, I think that a lot of these deep scars will not be able to be healed except by the Spirit of God through faith in Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah. We're going to need to see God move powerfully, I mean, supernaturally, to bring healing and thus hope. But even when you see natural expressions of hope and joy and elation and catharsis and relief, it's pretty powerful. But that's not all that's needed. So I encourage you to be praying for that. Let me share with you some other takeaways from Monday, October 13th. First of all, anytime the President of the United States, whichever party, whatever season, comes to Israel, it's a big deal. We're a very little country. And in President Trump's speech, he repeatedly said, how little Israel is. We are a little tiny dot, he said, not just on the map, but in even the map of the Middle East. And yet the influence of Israel is so outsized. People all over the world care about what's happening in this country, in the country of Israel, whether they hate Israel, love Israel, or aren't quite sure what they think about Israel. They are interested in Israel. And obviously that's part of why we do this podcast. People are like, they have a lot of questions. Great. Where can they find answers they can trust? Well, hopefully inside the Epicenter and long form podcasting. So I thought that the president coming was so important. What I was touched by, and this audience knows, I think, unless you're new, I have not always been in agreement with President Trump. I was a never Trumper in 2015. I did not see him as a healthy, good leader for the United States, although I didn't want his opponent. This is not a political show. I'm just, or a partisan show in any way, but I'm just I'm putting some of my cards on the table to say I see President Trump's flaws, but I also see his strength. And deal making is certainly a strength, but also not just political and, strategic connection to the state of Israel. He has an emotional connection to the nation of Israel, to the people of Israel. He mentioned in his speech, one of the takeaways for me was when he said, I didn't see it coming that my daughter Ivanka would convert to Judaism, because she loves Jewish people and she loves Israel so much. That was interesting to me that he took a moment to say, look, what he was saying is, I have a personal connection to this land. Yes, I love Israel as an ally, maybe the greatest ally that the United States has, most faithful, most effective. But I also have this personal connection and affection for the nation of Israel. And my daughter converted to become Orthodox Jewish, right? And married Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner, the architect with President Trump of the Abraham Accords, 2020, in which 4 Arab countries normalized their relations with Israel, made peace with Israel. And that was so beautiful and so powerful. But also Jared Kushner was brought in to help President Trump's current chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, to close the deal, to get the deal done that would release the 20 live Israeli hostages out of Gaza and put into place the framework to implement President Trump's 20-point peace plan that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff helped the president develop, along with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and obviously with Prime Minister Netanyahu and others. So that was just interesting, the family connection. The other thing I thought was interesting was how President Trump ended his address to Israel's parliament, the Knesset. He said, "I love you, and I'm with you. And God bless the United States. God bless Israel. God bless the people of the Middle East." That got a huge, thunderous, rapturous standing ovation, because Israelis know it's not just talk. Whatever you think about President Trump, wherever you're coming from, and this is not, again, trying to get you to become a supporter of him per se. I'm just analyzing what's happening and what's the context, and that is the people of Israel know that President Trump loves them and is with them. Now, it doesn't mean President Trump is always happy with Netanyahu. He alluded to it. I mentioned it in our interview with Tal. Several times Trump poked some playful, friendly fun at Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a strong cup of tea. He's fiercely committed to what he wants to accomplish. And Trump's like, "You don't have to be so angry now. You don't have to be such a fighter, Bibi. You've won, right? You can be nicer now." That was interesting because he's teasing Netanyahu a little bit about but Netanyahu can be prickly and off-putting, even to his own friends and political allies, much less the President of the United States. And yet, Trump has built such trust with the Israeli people that, because of actions, not just words, actions, that Israelis trust him and they appreciate him, but they also want to hear from any American president, but certainly a president that bombed the Iranian nuclear sites and a president that got all of our hostages out when everybody else said it can't be done, and the previous president, tried but couldn't get the job done. This means a lot that the President of the United States would come and personally, Woody Allen once said, 90% of life is just showing up. I'm not a big fan of Woody Allen's morality, but on that line is kind of interesting, right? Because it means sometimes you just have to be there. And Trump came. He came on the day that the hostages really were being released, in which Trump's and Netanyahu's promises to do this, that people doubted. They doubted, not that they mocked. Many mocked and said it can't be done, and they're not even serious about it. Trump came to say we were serious about it, and we did it. And there's more to do, but we did this, and we're going to do these things together. And Israelis have very high affection for President Trump, maybe, I think, more than any other country in the world. But it's also interesting that President Trump values his relationships with Arabs and Muslims, leaders and nations, right? President Trump's first, this is another takeaway, President Trump's first trip to the region in his second term, right, wasn't to Israel. It was to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Three key American allies that are Sunni Arab Muslims, right? That was interesting. And a lot of people at the beginning were like, why wouldn't Trump be coming to Israel? He's super pro-Israel. Why would he go to the Arab world? Well, President Trump wanted to deliver something for the American people and for Israel and for the neighbors. But he felt that what he had to do was shore up and strengthen his personal relationships with and the alliance with the Sunni Arab world. Two Arab countries that are very pro-Israel, pro-American, and have been very constructive, in de-radicalizing their schools, de-radicalizing their mosques, de-radicalizing their media. And that's the United Arab Emirates, which I think leads the league in that area, and Saudi Arabia, that's come a long way, a very positive direction under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Qatar has been a problem. I have a huge problem with Qatar. Qatar has been playing two sides. They say they're an American ally. We have a Central Command, CENTCOM base, American base, just outside of Doha, the capital of Qatar. But Qatar hosts Hamas terrorists in their country. These Hamas terrorist leaders live in high-rise luxury apartments in Doha, that Qatari capital. Qatar has been sending tens of millions of dollars over the years in suitcases and trunks to Hamas to fund their government, and thus in Gaza, and thus fund what became the war machine that attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023. Qatar keeps a very close relationship with the Iranian regime. Not a distant, hostile relationship, but they like the Iranian leadership. Qatar likes the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, who's been super hostile to Israel and the Jewish people. So Qatar is a real problem. And yet Trump has decided to try to pull Qatar closer to the United States and pull Qatar away from Iran's leadership, and Hamas. And so as we talked about with Tal, right, the evidence is starting to build, but particularly that interview I did that you heard on this podcast. And if you didn't, go back and listen to my interview with Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter, where Leiter said, I'm paraphrasing, but go listen to it. But the essence was, publicly, Trump's being very kind and warm and friendly to Qatar and Turkey. But behind the scenes, he basically threatened them and said, it's time to pick a side. And you can't deal with these Hamas people if you're not going to use that leverage to get these hostages out and move us to the end of the war and real peace. And so Trump's desire not just to love and stand with Israel, but also to build relationships with the neighbors geopolitically. I'm not talking about, he's not doing this for spiritual, gospel kingdom reasons. He's doing this for American interests, American national security and foreign policy interests. He's saying it's pro-American. It's putting America first to build a strong, solid, trustworthy relationship with our main ally, Israel, but also with our Arab allies, and even mixed allies that are a little wobbly and are kind of playing a two-sided game, like Qatar. Let's try to pull them towards us. If we have hard things to say, we'll say it behind the scenes, but publicly, let's try to be warm and friendly and pull Qatar in. That's an interesting strategy. It seems to have worked so far. It still makes me nervous, but I just wanted to say that as a takeaway, Trump was a both-and person in his address to the Knesset. He praised the Arab Muslim allies that have done so much to help persuade Hamas to surrender and to give up these hostages. And then he went right from Israel over to Egypt, to the Red Sea resort at the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, a resort town called Sharm el-Sheikh. If you ever get a chance to go have a little vacation in Sharm el-Sheikh, I highly encourage it. Lynn and I did that with our boys years ago, 2005. So 20 years ago, this fall, we spent some time in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it's a lovely place. And it's often where, because it's just quieter and peaceful and beautiful, it's a place where Egyptian leaders tend to have major diplomatic events. And Egyptian President Sisi decided to host this peace summit requested by President Trump, and to host it there in Sharm el-Sheikh. And Trump went there, and then he didn't just get a thunderous, rapturous applause and support from the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli leadership. He got something similar in Sharm, and he got everybody to sign on to this direction with this peace plan. It was a pretty impressive moment, and it was an impressive sense geopolitically of both and, of supporting Israel, but also strengthening American ties to Arab allies, but also non-Arab Muslim allies. Turkey is Muslim, but they're not Arab. Pakistan is Muslim, but is not Arab. Indonesia is Muslim, the biggest Muslim country in the world with 250 million people, but it's not Arab. So it's the Arab Muslim world that President Trump was building deeper, stronger ties. And you may recall, in fact, the president alluded to this, back at the beginning of his first term in 2017, President Trump decided to make his first trip to Saudi Arabia. He went to Riyadh, and he held a summit then of Arab Muslim leaders from all over the region, all over the world, and called on them to make a decision, give up terrorism, turn against terrorism and radicalism, and work together to strengthen the forces of moderation and of normality and of civilization. Choose life and not radicalism and death. And this was pretty bold talk in 2017 when the Arab Muslim world was really wrestling it. There were allies that were definitely, had already made that choice. And there were other Muslim countries that were not exactly all in. And President Trump put them on notice. I want to work with you, but you got to make a choice. Which side are you on? And he's deepening those friendships, those personal relationships, those strategic alliances and strategic relationships to advance American interests. The good news is American interests and Israeli interests have converged, and never has U.S.-Israeli relations been tighter than right now. Never, ever. And that's another takeaway. There are very few countries that love the United States, and that if you take a poll, they're like, woo, we love America. Israelis are off the charts in their love for America. The welcoming of the President of the United States, from both sides of the political spectrum, were just warm and gracious and grateful, actually, not just gracious, grateful for the President of the United States. And so that's another takeaway. I thought that another takeaway was that President Trump used a lot of biblical quotes and imagery and allusions that is not normal for his speeches. I'm not saying he's never done it, but as I mentioned, that he came right out of the gate in his first lines of the speech, his first paragraph of the speech included President Trump thanking the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then some beautiful passages throughout the speech. He quoted from the Old Testament, trust in the Lord and do good, seek peace and pursue it. What a great passage. Trump also gave a very interesting passage that was beautifully written by his speechwriters. But of course, just because speechwriters wrote it doesn't mean he's going to say it. But he embraced it. He said this is what he wanted to say, and he said it. And what he talked about was how the God who once dwelt with his people on earth in Jerusalem and brought truth is continuing to whisper truth to his people today and those who are willing to listen to it. Let me find that exact quote because it's so important. He's alluding to Jesus. It was God who became flesh and dwelt among us. So let me just pull that quote up real quickly. Oh, I don't have it on my phone. All right, well, we'll figure out a way to put some key quotes from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu as a link into this podcast. But it was beautiful. It was beautifully crafted, and it was unexpected, from me at least, that President Trump was not only thanking God, but really talking about wanting to think about Middle East peace from a biblical perspective. Now, I don't want to take that too far, but I think that was important. Just a few quick takeaways from Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. Oh, one more thing from Trump. One more takeaway. Trump was uncharacteristically magnanimous. Like he really, and I guess I mentioned this a little bit before, but he praised Netanyahu when most people in the media think that he has behind the scenes all kinds of hostile relations with Netanyahu. That's not true. It's clearly not true. But again, I mentioned it before, but just to underscore it, President Trump praised specific members of his own staff and specific members of Netanyahu's staff. This is Trump's triumph, and he did come in some degree to certainly bask in the joy and maybe the glory of having this huge international breakthrough. Totally miraculous, totally unexpected, especially for the media and all the cynics and critics. But he didn't just say, this was me, it's all me. He really talked about his team. I thought that was lovely and magnanimous. On Netanyahu, I thought gave a beautiful speech, one of the best of his career, and I've been present for some of his biggest speeches. His famous speech to Congress opposing the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015, I believe it was. I happened to be in the chamber and watching it. And then last summer of 2024, when Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed a joint session of Congress and talked about what October 7th meant to Israel and the region and what Israel was doing to win the war and get the hostages back and And that was a very powerful speech, one of the best I've ever heard him give. And I've been tracking him and watching him for a quarter of a century. I thought this was a very, very, very good speech because it's not just about aspiration. Netanyahu is really talking about accomplishments, and they've been very dramatic accomplishments. I don't know where this thing is going. I don't know if Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to plan to run again. I used to think, and I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but I've thought of late, I think he just wants to win this war, let that be his crowning achievement, and then maybe step off the stage. Maybe not. We'll see. This is not a political show, and it's not a partisan show by any means. We don't endorse political candidates in any country, certainly not in the United States or Israel. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch. Netanyahu, of course, expressed in multiple ways his gratitude to the American people, to the American Congress, and particularly to the President of the United States, President Trump, all that the United States has done to provide the weapons that Israel has needed to win and provide the political support. And Netanyahu talked about how in the previous administration, he was not getting the support that he felt Israel needed to put the pressure on Hamas to surrender. Netanyahu felt that the previous administration and certainly many world governments were putting pressure on Israel to surrender. Enough already. Just accept a ceasefire and let that be it. And Netanyahu resisted that. Why? Well, his critics said because Netanyahu wanted war to go on forever so that he could just stay in power forever and avoid corruption trials, avoid elections, and avoid accountability. Because Netanyahu said we're not going to have sort of a state commission of inquiry on what went wrong on October 7th and leading up to October 7th until the war is over. And so there was all this criticism. In fact, Netanyahu has just ended the war, but he believed that he had to keep fighting so that Hamas wouldn't be a threat again. And with President Trump's help, Netanyahu believes that this formula of this 20-point plan not only got the hostages back, fulfilling a promise, but also has set the groundwork for really disarming and demilitarizing Hamas, demilitarizing Gaza, and putting the region into a good position where more countries can join the Abraham Accords, Netanyahu said soon. There's a lot of humor in the speeches. I encourage you, if you have a moment, to just watch the full speech by Netanyahu, by Trump. It was a big deal. In closing, I just want to say that there's a lot to pray for. But I want to start with a personal note and just say thank you to all of you who've been praying for my family, for my father, who lost his beloved wife of 60 years. My dad and my mom celebrated their 60th anniversary on August 14th, 2025. And on October 2nd, 2025, my mom went home to be with the Lord. She was a great wife. She was a great mom, and she was a great servant of Jesus. And she loved Israel so much. And she came to Israel so many times with my father. And she also loved the neighbors. And she traveled multiple times to Arab and Muslim countries. And she really had a heart for both. And she and my father were real encouragers of us when we started the Joshua Fund. They themselves had started a ministry in 2000. And so when the Lord seemed to be calling Lynn and me to start the Joshua Fund in 2005, that's when we got the idea, and we're talking to friends and colleagues, is this really from the Lord? Is that when we started in 2006, we had the courage that it could be done because we'd seen my parents do it. So it didn't seem crazy, hard, but not crazy. So I'm so grateful to my parents. Appreciate your continued prayers for my dad. We had a beautiful memorial service for my mom. The congregation pastored by one of our board members at the Joshua Fund, Ed Taylor, at his congregation just outside of Denver, Colorado. And it was a beautiful ceremony. I was very honored that my dad asked me to give the eulogy. And we'll probably play that eulogy and maybe some other excerpts from the memorial service on an upcoming podcast. But it was an interesting day. I'll just close with this thought that it felt like I was living in a split screen over this past week or more. Sadness for losing my mom, going through grief, although knowing my mom's in heaven, so it's not grieving without hope, as the Bible says, but it's a loss to lose your mom any age, certainly at 58. I love my mom dearly. We were very close. But so to deal with that, as well as the elation, the excitement of seeing the hostages all come out, this huge answer to prayer that we've been praying for 2 years straight. Wow, that was a lot of emotions, not that much sleep, but a beautiful memorial service. And it was so great to see so many people from all over the country come, including a number of Joshua Fund staff. Were so sweet to drop everything and just come to the service. And then the webcast, the live stream cast, we got messages from people from all over the world, literally, who watched it, who loved my mom, who'd been blessed by my mom and dad in their ministry. And it was very sweet. So we're processing all of it and then getting ready to go back to Israel. And I'm grateful for your prayers and the prayers of this Inside the Epicenter community and the Joshua Fund community of supporters, financial supporters, prayer warriors. Thank you. I just want to say thank you on behalf of Lynn and me and our entire family. It means it's an enormous deal to us. We're very, very grateful, and we have felt upheld by your prayers, and my dad certainly has as well. He's got an adjustment to make going forward, and it's not going to be easy to lose your best friend of 60 years, but the Lord is going to take care of him. He knows that. He loves Jesus deeply, and he's just trying to deal with all the emotions and all the change right now. So appreciate your continued prayers for him, and obviously your continued prayers for Israelis and Palestinians and everybody in the region as we try to navigate through what's just happened and where are we going next. Well, thank you so much for watching or listening to this edition of Inside the Epicenter. You can check our show notes for things that we've mentioned or alluded to in the program. Grateful to Tal Heinrich for her friendship and for her really insightful analysis of and unique perspective, having been not just a reporter, but one of the spokeswomen for Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's been a big week. The world has been riveted on the Epicenter. And, you know, I when I wrote the book years ago, 2006, called Epicenter, I think the first line was something like, the eyes of the nations are riveted on Israel and our neighbors, the epicenter of the momentous events that are changing our world and shaping our future. And that's never been more true than this week. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please share this with family and friends so they can understand and get this perspective and kind of think through what's happening, how to pray about it, how to see it from a biblical perspective. Please give to the Joshua Fund. We definitely need your generous giving. You can go to joshuafund.com, go to the donate button. It'll walk you through how to give. And if you could become a monthly donor of $50 or $75 or $100 or more, that would be wonderful. It's all tax deductible in the United States and Canada. It's all secure giving online in a number of different ways you can give. Or you can send a check, and all the details are there. We need your prayers, and we do need your financial support as we continue to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. For all of us on the board and the staff of the Joshua Fund, the podcasting team, thank you. This is Joel Rosenberg, the president and one of the founders of the ministry, and your co-host of this podcast. Thank you for listening to Inside the Epicenter. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.